in Kinston at Queen Street United Methodist Church, and welcome to our Wesley Bible study. Today we're going to be going through chapter 31. It's not a long chapter, but it speaks to us today because there are issues in it that we think about as we worship you. What does it mean to be doing that sort of thing, and about Sabbath and the rest? So the Lord is still speaking to Moses, and he's explaining to Moses about everything that goes into the tabernacle and how to build the tabernacle. But now he's going to not just give a job description, he's going to hire a couple of folks. So let's see what happens here. The Lord spoke to Moses, "See, I have called by name Bezalel, son of Uri, son of Hur, of the tribe of Judah, and I have filled him with divine spirit, with ability, intelligence, and knowledge in every kind of craft, to devise artistic designs, to work in gold, silver, and bronze, in cutting stones for setting, and in carving wood, in every kind of craft. Moreover, I have appointed with him Aholiab, son of," oh, this is good, "Ahisamach, of the tribe of Dan, and I have given skill to all the skillful, so that they may make all that I have commanded you: the tent of meeting, and the ark of the covenant, and the mercy seat that is on it, and all the furnishings of the tent, the table and its utensils, and the pure lampstand with all its utensils, and the altar of incense, and the altar of burnt offering with all its utensils, and the basin with its stand, and the finely worked vestments, the holy vestments for the priest Aaron, and the vestments of his sons for their service as priests, and the anointing oil and the fragrant incense for the holy place. They shall do just as I have commanded you." Wow. I'd say these guys were general contractors. It's interesting because, it's sometimes you feel like you're led of the Lord to do something, and then you wonder, okay, who's in this with me, and can we get it done? Evidently, God already had some people in mind, and we don't hear about these guys after this, but there are a couple of reasons, I think, for putting their names in. One of them, as I said, is that everything that has been described that goes into the tabernacle and the tabernacle itself is part of a police report to Darius of Persia, and so that they can recover these items from the Babylonian captivity and bring them back to Jerusalem. But it helps also if you can identify them even more specifically. This is the handiwork of these two artisans. So if you have anything on there that indicates that these artisans were involved in the construction of these things, then you can claim them and bring them back. So it's a matter of ownership and and recovery. That's what this is all about. If these two guys were responsible for all of the stuff that has been described in the previous chapters, they're going to need a really big workshop, and several workshops. You're going to have workshops that have to do with textiles, and you're going to have a workshop that deals with smelting and forming things, and you're going to have a workshop that has to do with the formation of incense and special oils and things like that. You're going to have, it's got to be an industrial complex of sorts in order to do this. And this is not what you see for nomadic people. This isn't stuff you do on the fly. Okay, so anyway, all of the things that have been made that are described in here had to be constructed in some sort of a permanent settlement in order to get this kind of work done. So that's why I say this is not necessarily indicative of what they were carrying around in the wilderness. This is more indicative of what the Babylonians stole out of Jerusalem. On the other hand, there is this as well. There are some people who the Bible is a contradiction on worshiping. In the first place, God tells Moses when he's going to build an altar that it has to be made of unhewn stone, that it's going to be made of 12 stones, and it's not going to have any working, you can't use a chisel or anything on it to form it or to make it fit or anything like that. It's just got to be a natural altar, okay? Just stones. And somehow, if you can keep them together, I don't know. But that's the first time God tells Moses to make an altar. And so what he's telling Moses in the early chapters of Exodus is this is something you can build anywhere you are. So this is an altar that you can keep with you on the move, okay? Now the altar that they're talking about for the tabernacle is not something that's a terribly mobile thing. And it's not something that you just throw together at the last minute, tear down, and move on. This is something that has to happen deliberately and permanently, semi-permanently anyway. So you have people who think that places of worship should be simple and natural. And then you have other people who want to make great edifices, cathedrals, and stained glass windows, and tall spires, and things like that. The church that I had up in Halifax County was one of the churches, dated way back. It dated back to before 1881. It was a grove, and it was nothing more than an arboretum, and very simple. And then it developed into kind of a clapboard structure, and then it got a little fancier. Didn't get much fancier since then. But people did things to improve it down through the years.
Have you ever been to Westminster Abbey?
No, I have not. Pretty big, huh?
Oh, it is huge.
Yeah.
I never realized there's over 3,000 people buried inside of that church. And
I've had congregations like that.
When you talk about ornate and
They seem to be.
fancy, and that's Westminster.
Yeah, that's right. And Westminster Abbey is dwarfed by some of the mainland cathedrals. So at Duke Chapel, when Europeans come and they visit Duke Chapel, they think this is really a pretty modest place. So our sanctuary is spectacular compared to most sanctuaries that you see in eastern North Carolina. Okay, so there's a wide range, and some people think that it's simplicity is the best way to worship the Lord, and others feel like they need to have a lot of workmanship in there and memorials and things like that. And the church improves over the years. Nothing wrong with either way of looking at it. You have both styles evidenced in the book of Exodus. And on the one hand, the more simple kind of worship should lend itself, it doesn't typically, but it should lend itself to the other mission of the church. Okay, like for instance, the simplicity of an altar lends itself to the fact that these people are on a journey, and the mission is to get to the promised land. Okay, and if they have a really permanent kind of structure, they're not going to want to leave. I remember in Desert Storm, I think I told you about this, but I was before the attack, we were living in a hole in the ground, and I had 4 guys, and we were all living in this hole, and so we did things to improve the hole. We made it larger. We put a canopy over it. We kind of cut a shelf in the side so we could put our stuff, and then we had the order to go and attack. Well, part of that order was that you had to destroy whatever it was that you were in, so that the Iraqis could never use it. And man, I'll tell you what, it was painful filling in that hole. Uh, my granddaughter did a project one time for school, and she was supposed to interview me about things that I've done in my life. She said, "And what did you learn in the Army?" I said, "I can live in a hole in the ground if I have to." But you know, the more you focus on the structure, the less you might be focusing on the mission. Okay? So I like the first part of Exodus, where it is Exodus. It's an escape, and it's got a destination. You got a start and an end point, and if you build something in the middle, you'll never get to that end point. Okay?
That's like our journey, our Christian journey on earth.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, you know, we're just passing through.
We are just passing through. On the other hand, building a structure to the glory of God is a testimony in and of itself. There are people who are drawn to this church because of its beauty, and because of the music, and because, you know, every once in a while, the preaching too. But you know, well, I mean, I get to preach once in a while. But, you know, that's the kind of people, when people come into a place to worship God, they want to feel that they're in a worshipful place. And people will beautify that place to the glory of God and in honor or memory of other people. So when God gave Moses the tablets, he wrote the stuff on the tablets. We'll get into that, but he wrote the stuff on the tablets, okay? But God didn't build the tabernacle.
But they wouldn't have had to build the tabernacle if they had been the people that God had called them to be. And so he's having to change his plan along the way. He had intended them to leave Egypt and go to the promised land, but they were not very, they didn't obey. So because of that, they had to stay for 40 years, and that made it necessary to build something.
Oh, that's one way of looking at it. Yeah. At this point, though, when God appoints this tabernacle to be built, they're on the journey. There hasn't been.
But how long have they been on the journey at this point?
Not very long. This is the first part of it. Yeah. This is before the 40-year thing. Okay? That God tells them to build this tabernacle. So I'm doubting that this tabernacle was part of the journey thing.
Well, if I don't mind it.
I know.
But like you said, it contradicts the,
Yeah.
you know, we don't, what's better?
Right. Well,
So
I'll tell you what,
plant
if
where
you have,
are and do the best you can where you are, or keep moving and.
if you have a simple structure and you are fully satisfied with that, you may also be satisfied with nothing else that has to do with God's plan. Okay? On the other hand, you can focus so much on the building that you have that you forget the mission that you're there for in the community. And, you know, just like these huge, like Westminster Abbey, okay? These huge cathedrals were built not for the people. They were built for royalty, and they stole everything from the people to build it. Okay, they overtaxed them and everything. This is part of the problem with Solomon and with his son. So you can go to excess, and the point is, is your church, like we said about like I was talking about with the 5 loaves and fishes, are you putting in or are you taking out? Are you adding to or are you taking away? Okay. I like to think that this beautiful church is adding to, just by being here in the first place. But this church is adding to also because we're not neglecting what's going on in the community by any means. You know, we're looking after people, and we have a good mission going on. And we have undertaken other missions, not just for this community, but around the world. I've seen this church do marvelous things for people in Africa and you
But
know.
if you look around our church, we got nothing but old people in here.
No, that is not true. That is absolutely not true.
I pray.
Yes, I know you, and you know what? Your prayer is being answered. Would you look around that congregation and tell me there aren't young people in
When I
there?
started coming here quite a few years ago,
Yeah.
there was 300-400 people in church every Sunday. I sat upstairs with my family. My
Yes,
husband
ma'am.
sang in the choir, and the church was full.
Yes,
And now when I count, usually 40 or 50 people.
well, it's more than that.
60 or 70.
Yeah.
I think about it.
It's more than that, and there are people online.
I've seen as many as less than 50.
Yes, I know, but we've gone
I
through,
know that, but this is,
75.5 years. I've seen it.
but what we have
You've
to
seen it
forget.
like I
Yeah,
have.
but we have to remember, this is a different
Has
time.
changed.
This
It
is not the same as
Every
it was.
church is in decline.
Even when I grew up in a small.
oh boy, okay, hey, this is going to be a great transition to the next section of the chapter. Okay, but I want you to know that your prayers have been answered because we have a very good demographic spread in our congregation. Very good. And it's improving all the time. So I'm not worried about it.
I'm not talking about just this church. I'm talking, when I went home to Germany, when I grew up, the church was full, the Catholic Church. Every morning they had mass.
Yes.
And now it's empty.
Mm-hmm. And
I'm talking about most churches.
okay, and that is a question of whether or not churches have been able to maintain their relevance to the population.
I feel
And
like-
and I think that we're talking about the same thing in that in Europe especially, because a lot of this stuff has been subsidized by the government, the church has not felt a need to really minister to the community. They've been willing to sit back and take tax money to build their churches and to sustain their clergy, and they have not necessarily looked for what makes them relevant to the communities where they are. And that is something that is happening, I think, a lot in the United States. I also see a lot more competition for the church. There used to not be any competition for the church, but now there is.
In Germany, you pay religious tax
Yes,
to the Catholics. And a lot of people have gotten out of the church because of that. They
Sure.
don't want to pay the tax on it.
right.
You still pay the tax on it. Everybody pays the tax, I think.
Church tax. you
Yeah,
pay.
whether you go or not.
Well, no, the Roman
If you're a
Catholic Church
Catholic,
makes
you
an
pay church
assessment.
tax.
The Roman Catholic Church makes an assessment based on
But
what
in
they think
Germany,
you're.
They tax the people a small amount that went to the church. Is that not true?
Yeah.
Rain coming.
I don't know.
We got rain coming.
You're good.
I
You are
knew it.
good.
I had faith. I had so much faith, I shut off the water to my pool.
Santa,
You talk about
Santa,
competition
did you say the
within the
rain was
churches
coming?
or
I just got
competition
notification.
outside the church.
Competition outside the church.
Yeah, I mean.
Okay,
those-
but at the same time, when you drive through town, okay, how many churches do you see?
I know.
Yeah, one on every corner.
Yeah.
Okay? When I drive from Aden to Kinston, I'm passing churches left and right. Okay? They are all over the place. There are churches everywhere. And at the same time, and I think there's been a proliferation. And because there's been a proliferation, I think that people have more options on where they're going to go to church too. Okay, so I mean, there's a lot of things, there are a lot of dynamics that go into this, okay? But I really do think that churches need to be relevant to the communities. And that's one of the things that gives us credibility as Christians. You know, is that we're not just for us. We're not just for us. Another thing that I think has happened in a lot of denominations, that they have thrived in years past on being very judgmental. And we're not facing a generation that wants to be judgmental. Not to say that we shouldn't be discerning between what's right and wrong, but generations are coming on that really don't want to be held to account by the same standards that we have in the past.
When I read the Bible, and I try to read it most days, I noticed that God always punished the Jews when they failed him.
Yes,
Right?
that was a pattern.
I feel like that people nowadays falling away from the church the way they do from God. That the floods and the fires and the storms, God has sent that as punishment to the people.
I don't believe that at all.
You don't.
No, ma'am. I don't believe that God is punishing us with storms or floods or anything. You know why? Because we have always had storms and floods, and they seem to be indiscriminate about who they hit. Okay? So I've been in disaster work a long time. Okay? And yes, did God put together the natural order of things? Yes. Do we ignore it where we build things? Yes. Okay? It's just like, in Louisiana, I was watching a thing on the Mississippi River, and the Corps of Engineers has done everything they can to channel the Mississippi and build levees and everything. And now the silt that normally builds up at the mouth of the Mississippi has all washed away. So they are losing square miles of land as a result, and they're trying to put it back. We haven't got this right yet. Okay? And anybody who thinks that they can affect climate change or anything else is just, they do not understand how nature works.
Yeah, and how can you say if it floods New Orleans and it doesn't flood here? I mean, how can we judge that?
They were
God is-
sinful people.
Well, now I've been to New Orleans. I can understand that.
Building in a hole.
Yeah.
Having read the Bible, I feel
Okay.
like he punished them.
Yes, I agree. But we need to understand that principle still exists, okay? But the punishments that I see happening because of our ignoring the will of God and the directives of God, the punishments that I see are because when you start to do that, your society falls apart. And now we see that people have been ignoring it, and we have an explosion of crime because there is no justice. And, it's that kind of, and people are being punished today because of their neglect of what God has told us to do. We have homeless people all over the streets. We have immigrants that really don't belong here. We have all kinds of things going on because we are ignoring the kind of moral and ethical order and judicial order that God has ordained for us. And yes, we are reaping that kind of a whirlwind as a result. Now, the people who are writing the book of Exodus are people who are in exile. And you're going to see this theme over and over again, that God is punishing them. And when you see the description of how the judges and the kings acted and how they ignored the directives of God and made the whole society corrupt and vulnerable, and other nations took advantage of that, it makes perfect sense. And the thing is, that's a lesson that I think we can absorb today. But this idea that God is going to smack you with a storm. Now, I'm looking back on this, okay? There have been some fortuitous things just in the history of this country, okay? Like, for instance, the fog that rolled in to shroud the evacuation of Brooklyn Heights from the British so that Washington could escape from his army. And at the same time, a storm that rolled in that chopped up the York River that prevented the British from getting out of Yorktown, just before they had to surrender. These things are fortuitous. And the hurricane that hit in the War of 1812, when the British were trying to burn Washington, and all of a sudden a hurricane happened and the rains put the fires out. There are things that seem a little too coincidental, okay? But at the same time, I don't look at these natural events as necessarily being God's punishment for the way people act. I think that the damage and the destruction that has been done, like, for instance, all these wildfires that are taking place, you can look at Maui and say, well, they really never managed those forests, and they did away with the sugarcane fields that wouldn't burn so well, and they replaced them with resorts and things like that. So that now you've got just, the kind of grass that burns out there on the fields because they did away with their agriculture and their management. Same thing with Canada. They don't manage their forests. Like California doesn't manage its forests. So when you start looking at these huge forest fires that are taking place, you can also see there's been a tremendous amount of mismanagement. And one of the first things that God told people to do was to take care of the garden. And we don't.
Yeah, it almost seems a little, in my mind, the opposite. I don't think God punishes people like he did. I mean, he punished the Jews, and then he punished other countries by letting the Jews annihilate them
Yes.
for their paganism and and I don't see that anymore. I
No.
mean, I don't see, I mean, if anybody needed God's intervention, intervention was Hitler.
Yeah.
And he ruled until, and you could say, well, God worked through the Allies to take him out, and maybe that's true, but
I think it is true.
I don't see that God punishes people that deserve to be punished
No.
in today's world.
I look at it, God makes it rain on the just and the unjust. Okay?
For those that I think are getting away with things a lot more now, in the 7-year tribulation period, they will have to, they will suffer.
I think there's dues to pay for people's behaviors. And I think it goes generationally too. People bring this on their kids.
God always offered grace.
Hmm?
He always offered grace to the Jews.
Yes. Yeah. There were times when God divorced them and then took them back. Okay? And I'm kind of hoping that works for us.
It's like,
Okay.
I'll never forget. You said what goes around comes around, you said, I hope not.
Yeah.
I feel
Because I'm just as guilty of doing bad things as anybody else.
Yeah.
I feel like you do evil, evil will come back to you, and you do good, good will come your way. That's the way, I believe that with all my heart.
I do not think that there are any victimless crimes.
I
Some-
think there are, I think it's in the Bible, I don't know where, but I believe there are angels walking among us.
Oh, yes.
When my cousin and I were just in the UK, and we took a train from Edinburgh to London, and on the train there was this young man that my cousin, who doesn't know a stranger,
Mhm.
if she walked in this room, she'd be everybody's friend, just like that. It's the way she is. And she was talking to this young man. I'd say he was in his 20s. And she was telling him that we were gonna take a taxi from Victoria Station to our hotel. And he said, no, that'll cost you a fortune. He said, I'm going that way on the London Tube.
Right.
And he said, I will steer y'all through, and I'm getting off at the same station where you need to be, and then you can catch a cab and it won't be expensive. So he did, and I have had a lot of problems with my back, and I had a cane, and he took my suitcases, and he helped me, and he helped her. We got to the London Tube, and he steered us right to a taxi.
Well,
He was sweet as he could be. He was 6'7", black boy.
mm-hmm.
Now, I said that last because a lot of people would have steered clear of him because of his size and his color. But we didn't. He was a nice boy.
Yeah.
And when we left him, we offered to pay him. And he said, no. He said, I wouldn't dare take any money for helping you ladies.
Yeah.
And we hugged his neck. And that's, to me, reinforced that statement, angels walk among us.
Mhm.
Now, whether he was an actual angel, I don't know. But I
He
know
helped
that he
you
was,
in your time of need.
huh?
He was to you.
He was. He
Yeah.
was a kind, good, sweet young man who
Yeah.
helped.
I believe because of the experiences I've had with different ones here in the church, I believe there are angels here.
Oh, yes.
Beginning with
Hmm.
because
Angels come in a variety of forms. I can tell. I have seen them in combat.
Oh, don't you?
I mean,
Yeah. Yeah, last time I was in New York, we were coming out of the subway and there was a lady, evidently a visitor to the city, who had these big suitcases, and the stairs to the sidewalk were like way up there, and she was just standing there looking at, how am I going to get these up there? And I said, do you need some help? And she said, I could use some help. So I grabbed her suitcases and I ran up the stairs with the suitcases, and I could see the terror on her face. And when she got to the top of the stairs and saw I was still there with her suitcase, it was like, oh my God. And to think this happened in New York. But I wasn't from around there either. Okay, well, let's take a look at Sabbath real quick. Oh boy, I don't think we're going to have time. So we'll pick it up at verse 12, because there's an awful lot packed in these last verses in chapter 31. Yeah. Anyway, I hate when my watch talks to me and says irrelevant things. So we'll pick it up on Sabbath, and I'd like for you to be thinking about next Sunday, how do you celebrate Sabbath? What does Sabbath mean to you? What does it mean in our society today for Sabbath? Okay? I know that for years now, our conference has been urging ministers to take a Sabbath. They were not urging me to take a Sabbath when I first got in ministry, believe me. But it got to the point where now you had to go to seminars on how you take it, because they're having so many clergy with, nervous breakdowns and stuff. Anyway, just be aware that that's going to be a strong topic next Sunday. We're going to talk about Sabbath, okay? Well, thank you for being with us, and God bless you all. If you have any questions or comments about the lesson today, you can email me at revlev@nccumc.org. Okay, bye-bye.
We're excited to have the choir back today.
Oh, thank you.
Yes.